Good morning, and welcome to my presentation, The Few of the Crowd. This presentation is brought to you by coffee, which kept me awake, as well as Google Docs, where I wrote it, Firefox, which I wrote it on Windows 10, because I'd actually converted to PDF, but it kept on insisting on opening it in Microsoft Edge. So I figured, Firefox is better. Anyway, before I begin, please, no pictures and no recording. It's actually being recorded by our very able tech person. All right. What I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be talking about this resource list, going over its history, and then I'll be going over a brief, and then talking about some other documents. And if you want to look at any other ones, feel free to ask. But please wait until after I go through the whole thing. All right. This is a resource file that I've been working on for a while, a little more than 2 years. Resources for teachers of English to speakers of other languages. 3rd edition. Yeah. Basically, I started in April 2016 because I do a lot of reading online about TESOL-related stuff and other things, and I was concerned about what would happen to all my bookmarks if something happened. So I figured Google Docs would be better than Microsoft Word, because what if my computer has a problem? It's happened before. So I put it on Google Docs and I started adding them, and eventually I had to add sections, then whole separate documents. Then I eventually started describing them, and well, it got bigger. By May of 2016, it was the end of May 2016, it was 79 pages. By mid-August of last year, it was 322. By the beginning of January, it was 800 something, and now it's 1,043.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So I guess I wrote a dissertation. Yeah. Anyway, so rather than telling you all about it, I'm going to show you. Show, don't tell. All right. This document is the table of contents. It is 35 pages. All right. It is so big, I had to have a separate table of documents for the table of documents. Every single document on there. In-class resources and activities, writing-related stuff, all from Writing Lab. Parts of speech, classroom management, research on teaching and learning and ideas and the like. General theory of ELT, including 4 skills. Fascinating subject, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Methods of English language teaching, mainly from approaches. Lesson planning, training and education, as well as grad school stuff. And work and life stuff. That just shows the pages on the table of contents that those are. All right. So, in detail. Games. The document's 21 pages long, and it has 42 different websites. All different games. Yeah, this one, videos, it has a list of videos, some of which still work, some of which have been pulled because of copyright, as well as ad blockers, websites to show videos, free and paid. You got classroom resources, worksheets, quizzes, and the like. 34 pages and 137 websites. All sorts of different topics, including blogs, cultural stuff, which I want to turn into a document soon, mind mapping, spotting plagiarism. Seem kind of useful. General teaching ideas like improv, mentoring, using science to improve teaching. Fascinating subject. Then writing stuff, mainly from the Writing Lab, what I did in the Writing Lab. Dictionaries, thesauruses, how to evaluate sources, because not all sources are created equal. Like websites. Some websites are very good, but some are pretty biased one way or the other. So how do you evaluate them? Or books, how do you evaluate those? And grammar tips. Then writing, punctuation, sentences, and paragraphs. It's actually very interesting reading about. Paragraph is essentially like a small essay. You have the topic sentence, the supporting details, and the concluding sentence. The writing process, it seemed pretty useful. Everything from brainstorming to outlining to drafting, revising, editing, and then publishing. It's not linear, it kind of goes in a circle. And then APA style. 52 pages and 210 different websites. APA style, as I've learned, is like the US tax code. Very long, very involved, and kind of boring. But very, very useful. Unfortunately, you can't make money off it. All right. Everything about it, from different things to cite. How do you cite artwork? How do you cite dictionary definitions and encyclopedia entries? Or Wikipedia, if you use that. Probably shouldn't, but what if you do? Surveys, translations, personal communications, etc., etc. Citing yourself, you do need to cite yourself, otherwise you're plagiarizing yourself. Then margins, formatting, lists, paraphrasing, and on and on. Other writing style guides, but not nearly as much, because we mainly used APA. And then copyright images and figures. Kind of an important thing. If you use an image, you need to follow copyright. Unless it's you can claim fair use, but you need to be careful with it. Because if you use an image, if you're not careful, someone might send you a letter demanding a large sum of money. Yeah. But fortunately, there are things like Creative Commons, and you can claim fair use for educational purposes. Anyway, parts of speech, all different parts, small but still growing. Classroom management, different topics, working with students like adult learners, gifted and talented, introversion, learning profiles, special needs, and the like. Then groups. Did a lot of this when I was in group dynamics. Advantages, disadvantages, emotional management, people who are introverted working with groups. That was useful to learn. How do you handle all kinds of different people in groups? Not cut and dry. Team building, and the like. All right, motivation. Paying attention, multiculturalism, and the like. This one is actually a whole separate project I was working on. It's basically research I've read with summaries of it and insights I've gained from it. Like one thing, when you're teaching, when you're teaching something, try to build on what you've taught before, because it makes it easier for students to learn. Of course, you need to be careful with research. Learning theories and models, as you can see, everything from constructivism, humanism, Piaget, behaviorism, and the like. Factors affecting cognition, how we think. Things like attention, bias, cognitive load, or why you can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Heuristics, or biases. Then pedagogy-related topics, including teacher training. Read about a lot of that during becoming a teacher educator. Then we have academic journals from all different parts of the world. At least when I went through it a couple of years ago, every one of them was free and open access. A lot of them out there. Though some of them you need to be a member. And then other papers and articles, ebooks on education and the like. Generally, LT theory, or how to teach it, how to teach grammar, how to teach lexicon, the 4 skills, insights into them. And theories of teaching English as a second language. A lot of stuff we study in SLA. Ideas by different thinkers, Jim Cummins, Krashen, Vygotsky, affordances, Bix and Calc, error correction, language acquisition, scaffolding, zone proximal development, input and output. Then we got approaches, all the different approaches. You got communicative style approaches like DOLGME, communicative language teaching, inquiry-based learning, problem project-based learning, task-based learning. Basically, learning by completing tasks. Computer and technical methods like computer-assisted language learning, gamification, and the lexical approach, which was made possible because of the development of corporate life. Differentiated learning, a couple of different approaches there. Humanistic methods, the four that we studied as well as some other ones. Immersive approaches and older ones that still influence us today. So basically all sorts of things you need if you're developing a curriculum. Then I have lesson planning, curriculum design, English for specific purposes, which not much there yet, but later there will be more. Training and education, teacher training programs including MOOCs, videos, CELTA, Delta, certification, and graduate school. Found out a couple of years ago there were over 500 different MA TESOL programs worldwide, many in the United States, and I didn't even finish looking. Probably 700 or more. Perhaps it's the reason why SIT unfortunately is having financial issues, because the number keeps on going up. And then work and life, career advice, which I'll probably talk about more in detail. Teaching-related jobs in general, international schools, as well as jobs in different parts of the world. Living and traveling abroad, different fact books, information on specific countries, a few countries. News websites, free and unbiased, like the Associated Press, Reuters, AFP. Information on traveling, information on climate and living abroad. And then money and finance, pretty useful topic. So, as you can see, it's kind of a long document. Close to 3,800 websites, not including all the university websites that I found. So, that's the project I've designed in a nutshell. Now, before I continue, do you have any, are there any that you'd like to look at in detail?
So are all the hyperlinks to like other Google Docs?
Yeah.
Is that kind of what it is?
Yeah. As an example, like this.
Ah.
Yeah, it opens up and basically, that's just a table of contents. This is a separate document. With a separate table of documents, give it a minute to open. And then you go down through it and basically you have the title. A lot of them, what I ended up doing, the title, the website, you just click on it, it opens, and a brief description of it. Some of them I also put down bias, what kind of bias test. Does it tell it as it is? Is it biased one way? Is it biased the other way? And some notes as well. Like this one is run by Australia, and where, if there's a copy of it somewhere else where I can find it.
This is so impressive.
Thank you.
I'm like in awe.
And so extremely useful.
Yeah, Matt, wow.
Well, now that thank you very much. Now that I've talked about that, I'm going to talk about a few documents in particular I want to focus on that I figure you guys might find interesting. All right. First, since several of you here are going to be looking for work soon. All right. Because, let me rephrase myself. Since most of us are getting our master's degrees, are going to be looking for jobs that actually can potentially start paying back our student loans. All right, teaching-related jobs. This one's about 26 pages. All right, one thing to bear in mind when you're looking for work, one insight I've learned. find where you want. One thing you can do is decide where in the world you want to work. China, Missouri, Antarctica. And then see what professional societies are there. TEFL and TESOL International are the big ones. But there's one in the United States called NABE, I think. Yeah. National Association of Bilingual Educators. They each have their own career websites, and a lot of their local chapters have job websites. So that's one place to look. Types of teaching jobs. Blah 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 blah. All right. Different job sites like CareerJet, Craigslist, interestingly enough. ESL Cafe, which I'm sure most of you know about. ESL Directory, ESL Employment. They're actually pretty good. They email out a list of new jobs every day, sometimes twice a day. ESL Job Feed, Job Find, Jobs, blah 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 blah. Oh, I didn't realize there were that one. Wow. Blah blah blah. Yeah, of course, LinkedIn. Monster. If you're a return Peace Corps volunteer, you got the Career Center.
Which I think you can use even as a non-return Peace Corps volunteer. And then you also have recruitment organizations. The thing about recruitment organizations, if you use one, you should never have to pay. The employer pays them. So if you're looking for a job and you talk to a recruiting agency and they want money, turn around. Nothing more to do with them. English Language Fellows Program. Very interesting program. Footprints, Greenheart, and on and on. And then international schools, as I learned, international schools is kind of a misnomer because it depends on the country. You've got American schools, British schools, Australian schools, a few, Canadian schools, and IB. The three biggest are American, British, and IB. And there are ways to go about that. You can contact them directly, or you can go to a career fair. I think there's one at George Mason, another one in Northern Iowa, in Cedar Falls. So those are teaching-related jobs. And jobs in different parts of the world. It's still under construction, but you can see where it's going. Africa, Asia, quite a few in Asia. Europe, Australia, former Soviet Union, Latin America, US and Canada. The impression I've gotten from looking at them, they're ESL English language teaching jobs all over. But the jobs that pay the best, as you may know, are Near East followed by East Asia. And good luck getting a job in the European Union if you're not a citizen of a member state. Though it kind of depends on the country. Some countries like Germany might be a bit easier, but others you're not going to. And the United States and Canada, still working on it. So, any questions about that so far? To continue, career advice. Some stuff that was covered last fall with Squeak and Caitlin. Other stuff that I found out on my own, like writing cover letters, elevator pitches. Well, actually, you can read it. Some insights I've gained from that, from my own study. All right. Basically, the point is, the things that they taught us, those are good things to do. Those are useful, but they don't work for everyone. Like networking. What they told us about the whole elevator pitch, going up to people, giving business cards, that's one thing that works very well for some people. But there are other things you can do. Like, you have any ideas? Informational interviews?
Yeah, informational interviews. Or you can volunteer at conferences. Like me, I found the tech stuff to be kind of fun, so maybe I could do that. Or other things like social programming. Or you can help out with different professional societies. They're always, I've heard they're generally looking for members for committees. And oftentimes they're even looking for people to run the committees. So that's one thing, those are some things you can do. Or if you go to a conference and if you're a little more, not quite as outgoing, just pick a set number of people to talk to and talk to them. Or maybe talk to a few people in depth. I did that once when I was in Korea. And the guy I talked to, I still keep in touch with him. Very interesting person. He's a professor in Japan and does a lot of stuff on evidence-based teaching. And he uses science to teach. Fascinating subjects. Or another thing for personal branding. There are different ways to do it. The point that I gathered from my reading was basically to find what works for you, but basically to figure out your story and to tell it to people, and to focus on developing strong professional relationships. That is more important than anything else. How you do it is up to you. So, general advice for working abroad, how to find TESOL jobs all over the world, dealing with unemployment, long-term unemployment. If you ever deal with that, and I hope none of you ever do, the key is to figure out why and to be able to explain it. Because if you have a long period of unemployment, recruiters might think, oh, were you eating bonbons and watching Survivor reruns? No, you need to be able to explain it. Like, I was taking care of my parents, or I was doing volunteer work. Things that make you look good, as long as they're true. All right, so there's that. Another thing I wanted to talk about, near and dear to my heart, is APA style. I spent a lot of time in the writing lab reading about it. Like I said, it's very detailed, like the tax code. As I realized, it's a bit like an unruly beast that kicks and bites and claws at you. But it takes time to get used to it. And when you're used to it, it actually kind of makes sense. So basically, it covers everything from abbreviations, acronyms, keywords, abstracts. They do have guidelines for writing abstracts. So if you write one for your theme essays, and you write an abstract, you need to follow APA style. And the abstract's the most important thing. Keywords, that's what search engines find. All right. We're currently on the 6th edition. Who knows how long it'll be around? Because when we come out with the 7th, we'll have to redo it. All right. If you have artwork and tables and the like, there are ways to cite it. Basically, the whole thing about APA style is its way of organizing things and showing. It's a way of organizing papers and also indicating who wrote what, where you got stuff. And they have ways for everything. Even lectures and handouts, which would be unpublished manuscripts. Or emails would be personal communication. You don't put personal communications in a reference list, but you would put lecture notes. So the notes I can email, you put that into your reference list as an unpublished manuscript. All right. So yeah, it's APA style. And voice about APA style, generally it's best to use active voice, but sometimes passive voice is good. So before I continue, do you have any questions about APA style?
Not that you have time to answer. Trust me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And finally, one that I've been studying on my own, cognition, factors affecting human thinking. Very interesting topic, which kind of touches on what Cyrus talked about. Essentially, how humans think. We pay attention to things, but there's way too much information out there. Like, let's say you go to Hannaford. How much stuff's in Hannaford? That's a real question. A little?
A lot.
Yep. And how much time could you spend in Hannaford? Yep, a week. Well, let's say you go to a bookstore, go to Amazon. You go to Amazon.com, 10 years later, you're not even done with it. Now, so attention, we notice things, but we concentrate our focus. Now, the way that we sort through this information, we call it heuristics. And it's basically shortcuts we use. So you go to Hannaford and think, okay, I need cereal, steak, vegetables. So you go to where you're looking for. Those are heuristics. They're basically shortcuts. Which leads to biases, which are related to heuristics. And they're not always bad. They're kind of neutral, but they can be bad. If you say things like, oh, women are blah, that could be a bad thing. Likewise, men are blah. But ultimately, there's mental shortcuts that we use to simplify thinking, save time. The key is to make sure that your biases are not inaccurate. And if you do have them, to correct them. Unfortunately, they're very difficult to correct. Using an analogy of the three little pigs, they go up as quickly as the first pig's straw house, but they're harder to knock down than the third pig's brick house. That's the thing about cognitive biases. Easy to go up, next to impossible to knock down. And cognitive load, or why we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. We only have so much working memory available. That's why phone numbers generally have 7 digits. Because that's all we can remember, short-term memory. But cognitive load, it's related to, and it's why you have to be careful of how you teach. Because if you're teaching too much, or the information is too hard, you exceed your students' cognitive load, and it's going over their heads. They're not going to learn anything. You need to keep what they're learning beneath the level of cognitive load. You don't want to overload them. But over time, you can gradually increase because they create schemas. So that was the other document I wanted to talk about. So are there any questions or any other ones that you want to look at?
I just had a question. I know you've been interested in bias all year, before that. Did you think about bias as you were creating your resource file and how you decided to select various elements?
It's interesting you should say that, because as I researched, I found out that some sites, kind of like what I said earlier, they have biases. Some sites are very thorough and comprehensive and very good, but they take a little while to read. Some sites are a good introduction. Some sites play up one side. Some play up the other. Like when I was reading about differentiated instruction, for instance, last fall, for approaches, I found there were some sites that were really gung-ho about it. And I found out after a while, and the whole thing about bias is, that could be a good source, but it's not enough. Likewise, there were other sites that were really down on it. And maybe they're good and a good counterbalance to the positive bias ones, but you need to be careful with them. And ultimately, my bias was I wanted sites that told it as it was. Or if there was one that was biased one way, I wanted to have one that was biased the other way to try and balance it. Because basically, I wanted to make sure that the sites that I had, they were all accurate. They hold information.
So this is like huge and very extensive. I guess, I don't know if this is not a good question, but like, can we have access to this?
You know, it's funny.
Like, I would like to read through this, but I don't know how you feel about that. Like,
Well, I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it, to be honest.
okay.
Even when I read about copyright, I'd be just a little nervous about releasing it, because I might get an angry letter from somebody saying, you owe us money.
Okay.
So there's that. Or selling it, but again, that's requires marketing. So I haven't decided yet.
Oh.
Yeah. But I'm sure I'll figure it out at some point.
Let us know when you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to sign up.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Ah, yeah, you could almost sell subscriptions to it.
Maybe an app. Maybe an app that you need a subscription for.
Yeah.
But yeah, future directions I'm planning on going with this. There are other things that I want to add, like cognition. I want to add even more to that. More about memory, problem solving. I mentioned there was a thing about different cultures. Where was it? This one.
I realized when I was going through it the other day, that would actually probably be a very good document of its own. Add some stuff from my ICL team and other stuff that I found and go from there. So that's something else I want to add to it. So, it's not done, but as Leslie Turpin said, Professor Turpin said, you're never done, you just stop.
Would you say abandon?
Yeah.
Abandon is not the word she used.
She thinks she used the word abandon.
Abandon.
Like CDAs.
I don't prefer the word stop. Abandon just sounds like I've given up on it, which maybe I have, but I don't want to admit to it.
Though maybe the Tanzanians have a better way of looking at it. Instead, because what they say, they have a saying, elimu ni bahari. Education is an ocean. So something like this, it's like an ocean. You can keep going and going, but you never stop.
What inspired you to do this?
Well, ultimately, I do a lot of reading online, and I wanted a place to put my bookmarks. And I originally it was just a bunch of bookmarks. And then I thought, okay, I need titles to show what it is. And then a while later, I thought, okay, I need something to show what's in here. So I started summarizing it. And then later I realized, okay, I need to indicate which sources tell it as it is versus sources that are biased. So I put that down. And I also put notes down. Okay, I need to include special notes about how to use this. So that's how I created it. And I also created separate sections to organize it. Like career advice, cover letters. Everything here deals with cover letters. Everything here deals with elevator pitches, but not cover letters. It's organized to make it easier to sort through. Because if you throw everything together, you'd be like going to a library and you'd have Moby Dick next to the Encyclopedia Britannica. How could you use it? So you got to be able to organize it to make it more useful. All right, other questions?
Well, I guess the real challenge is deciding which of these have some kind of copyright that it would be difficult for you to put out to the world. And did you investigate that, or?
No, I haven't. I know of at least one other site where if someone else did something like this, but I don't know if he included descriptions of it. And I think his site's free, so I'd have to look into that as well.
It's interesting though, I mean, all the sites are public.
Yeah.
They're
And
not,
it's basically,
they're not giving the membership key code or password.
well, the thing I'd be concerned about with that is someone might say, well, we're actually neutral, we're not in favor of this thing.
Yeah, you could have your opinion on it.
But essentially it's
Like
something to think about.
asterisks of, like, these are my opinions, these do not reflect the
Yes.
opinions of the
Yeah.
company
Yeah.
stated within this.
These are the opinions of the person who spent 600 hours researching this.
Yeah.
Yeah, 610 actually.
Not that you can track.
Funny you should ask.
Notch it all.
All right. No, we're only 34 minutes so far. So what else would you like to, do you have any other questions? Or would you like to look at something else?
I was just curious about your experience working with Google Docs as the platform for this. I like Google Docs, but I wondered if you encountered any challenges.
Well, one challenge I've encountered on my computers, on the computer I've used for this, I can't make docs more than 80 pages. If it gets longer than that, it starts having connection issues, which is very frustrating. Easy to utter some colorful metaphors. That's a Star Trek joke. But that's one thing I learned. But another thing I learned is that with Google Docs, you can type whatever you want. But if you try to convert it to Word, it looks a little different. And the spacing might be a bit different. Like converting it to Word, the table of contents on Google Docs was 35 pages, but on Word it was 34. Slightly different. The PDF, it looks like it converts pretty much exactly. And you can put down whatever you want. You can put in websites, you can highlight words and put a link, you can put a hyperlink there. And you can link one Google Doc to other docs, like what I've done. But the thing about it is it takes a few seconds to open, especially if you're But I've also noticed if you're using it for a while, it takes up more and more RAM. So eventually, from time to time, you have to close your browser and reopen it. Or at least that's what I did. I think my computer's kind of old. Maybe different. Maybe it would be different if I had a new computer.
Sorry, this is another follow-up tech related,
Go ahead.
but I get, even though I like Google Docs, I sometimes get paranoid. Well, what if everything just disappeared? So I need to save it in some other form. How do you back up all this work that you've done?
Well, that's a good question. What I do, file, and then download. You can download however you want. I actually did that last night and the night before. Download everything to PDF. So, I did that, and ended up with all that.
Whoa.
This is why I'm using Firefox, because it insists on using Microsoft Edge. But essentially, that. It's the same as what I had. And I did that for everything except for the table of contents, which I had to download to Word and then change all the links. Because if I had downloaded to PDF, it would have opened up to the Google Docs. Kind of defeats the purpose. So that's the way to back it up. You put that, you download that and then put it on a backup hard drive. That's how you back it up. And I guess another problem with Google Docs is that occasionally there are outages. I've experienced one. It was last fall, was kind of frustrating dealing with, but it was all across the Northeast. So that's a potential issue to deal with. But yeah, that's a good point about what if Google Docs goes down. Because no computer system is perfect. Other questions, tech related, non-tech related?
So I was just looking, the one you just opened up was the games one.
Yeah.
So how did you decide which games to include? And do you have a statement at the beginning saying these were the criteria I used, or?
Well, what I did, there's no statement at the beginning. What I did is I used a search engine. And I went through it and looked at the games. And every one that I found, I put down that I had to pay for. And occasionally, I went. Now the thing about these, that leads me to another point. I tried to make sure that I had several different, for each section, that I had several different websites rather than one, because sometimes websites go down. Like, actually the next one is better. Trying to find one that I crossed out. I'm not going to spend time searching for it, but I found sometimes if I go through it and find out it's not up, what I've done what I've done is I just cross it out, and I can do that in Google Docs, because sites sometimes go down, sometimes come up. And it would not be much. And what if a site goes down for a while and then comes back up? Like, what if they forgot to pay their bill for the month? And the site goes down, and I delete it. Well, then, first of all, there goes my hard work. And second of all, what if it goes back up? Just do that.
So you're going to have to constantly be
Yep.
checking on it, editing, adding things to it.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, at the moment, I'm still in the adding process.
Yeah.
But I figure the problem with going through, I guess that's another problem then, because if you going through it, you add stuff to it, eventually going back, you need to check and see what works.
But it seems that it's more extensive than
Yeah.
specific, right? I mean, you're trying to include as much as you can.
Yeah, but I'm also trying to have some depth as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To
But
sell it and then hire people to look through it.
Yeah, right, yeah, you need a whole staff.
You have a business model, Matt?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, so all the people that are unemployed.
Yeah.
You could fire us.
okay, first I need a Harvard MBA. Maybe an app designer. Anyway. Well, we're at 40 minutes, so any other questions? Do you want to look at any other ones?
Choose your favorite.
Well, it'd be factors affecting cognition.
But, well, since you spoke, let's look at the 4 skills.
Okay, that's okay, 4 skills.
No little lady, no unfortunate. Actually, no, let's look at copyright first. Copyright, this is kind of important because in America, as you know, people are a little touchy about that. Some companies, no, I'm not gonna say anyone's names. Some companies might sue you. So essentially, especially for images and figures, you need to be very aware of it. And if it belongs to someone, there's a whole lengthy process you go through. Find out if it belongs to anyone. If it belongs to someone, it's not Creative Commons, or it's not public domain. You need to contact them, get their permission. And then you decide it the way they want you to. It's a very cumbersome process.
So even if I want to use it in a presentation, I mean, I'm not going to give it to anybody or sell it or put it in a book.
Well, that goes down to fair use, which is, you can actually go through fair use, and actually I'll show you. Anyway, fair use. Essentially, there's a checklist that was developed at Columbia University. And fair use, if you're doing it for a presentation, there are things that can determine whether it goes more to fair use or goes biases against it. Like, where do you work? What's the project? Things favoring fair use, like, is it teaching, research, scholarship? Blah, 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 blah. Opposing, is it commercial activity? Are you profiting from it? Or is it bad faith? I mean, are you saying, this site is horrible? That's bad faith. Denying credit to the original author. And restricted access. Who can access it? Or parody. Parody would be okay. And favoring, opposing. So you go through that and check and see, and if it decides more to fair use, you probably get away with it. Education, you can generally get away with it, but you need to be a little careful. Another thing about it is that you can't take everything. Like if you were to show, and that's a reason why when you're reading books, why you can't take the whole thing, why you can only take little pieces. And you can't take the core of it out. Because if you take the core out, well, you just plagiarized. So that's fair use. Now, one thing about copyright to bear in mind, if you're using images, there are a lot of free images out there. A lot of free stock photo sites that you can sign up for. Like Flickr, Burst, which looks pretty good. Free images, Pixabay, public domain, and then a whole list of different sites. And Creative Commons is a component. Pretty much everything, most things on Wikipedia are Creative Commons, so you can get away with using that. You just have to cite it based on how the author wants, how the author creator wants it to. So hypothetically, if we were to use a picture of mine, and I said, okay, it's Creative Commons, you need to cite it in the way that I want you to. There are also paid sites, but if you're going to use, you have to pay to use them, especially Getty, they're very expensive. Yes, they are. Other ones aren't as much, but they're pretty expensive. They're kind of, a lot of them are pretty expensive. But the thing is, if you're on Google Images and you see something from that, do not download it. Because they probably have a group of people who keep an eye on it.
Fierce.
Yeah, and if you do that, you might find yourself having to pay them a nice sum. So, paid photo sites, don't download from them. Even if it's on Google Images, do not download. Sign up for one of the free sites, or use Creative Commons. All right, actually, we have 1 minute left.
Thank you for showing us this.
Wow, very impressive.
Okay, now, time for feedback. What I'd like you to do for feedback is this. I would like you to tell me, on one side, what did you like most about this presentation? And on the other side, how would you have presented this? 2 things I'd very much like to know. Do you want one, Steve?
No, I'm good.
Okay.